Now we're about to move on to another discussion. This time, it's all about protecting minority ethnic communities online when it comes to AI and racial justice. And it's going to be chaired by Gina Netto, a professor in migration, ethnicity, and racial justice. And will reveal findings based on interviews with black Africans, black Caribbeans, Bangladeshis, Indians, Pakistanis, and Chinese individuals, I believe. So as I say, please do submit questions so that Professor Netto can get them to our panelists. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much to the Scottish Alliance for inviting us. We're delighted to be here and to have this opportunity to engage with the AI community in Scotland and in England. I'll be very brief in my opening remarks, but just to say that the Protecting Minority Ethnic Communities Online project is a 3-year UKRI funded project. We are coming up to our end of our first year. We've got exciting things to report and looking forward to the next lot of work. It's pretty much what it says on the can. It's, we're aiming to advance understanding of how minority ethnic communities engage with online services and the implications for AI, and also then to create, of course, safer online spaces for everyone. So we've got a fantastic panel here from our project team, and that includes both our very valuable community research partners as well as members of the research team. I should say that it's a collaboration between a consortium of a number of community organizations and 5 universities led by Heriot-Watt and in collaboration with Cranfield, York, Open University, and Glasgow. Okay, and of course, a range of community organizations working with Scottish Government, the NHS, and other organizations. So I think that's all I'm going to say for now, before I introduce you to the panel. But also before that, to just say that we will have an opportunity to engage with you through polling and also through questions. So this applies to those of you who are online as well as in the room. Please do engage with us. Please do stay with us. We really want to engage with you. That was the main motivation for coming. So do stick with us and beyond the session as well. So there are all sorts of ways for keeping in touch with us. Okay, so, and I'll remind you that there's a digital booth and there are things online as well for which you can leave your details. So first speaker is my pleasure to introduce Colin Lee, who is Chief Executive of SEMVO Scotland. SEMVO Scotland is a national is a Scottish, is a partner with, is a national intermediary organization and partner, strategic partner to Scottish Government. I should let Colin actually correct any minor errors there. And I'll hand over to you, Colin, just to say, what your motivation was for joining us.
Thank you for Gina. Can you all hear me okay? And are you okay if I sit here, or would you prefer me to stand up and pace up and down? No. Thanks. So I'm Colin Lee, as Gina said. I'm Chief Executive of SEMVO Scotland. So we're a national intermediary organisation, strategic partners with the Scottish Government, and we have about 600 ethnic minority organisations as part of our network throughout Scotland that we provide capacity building support programmes to. I won't cover everything we do, but we have a lot of programmes on social enterprise development support for the sector, employability support. We do a lot of work on the environment and have a network where communities engage in climate change policy. We do financial capability support and capacity building and funding for the sector. And we also do a lot of work in terms of public sector and first sector engagement to help them progress race equality. So a lot of our work basically actually fits into the Scottish Government action plan and framework for Scotland in terms of race equality. So going back to Gina's question as to why SEMVO got involved, I guess the starting point for us is very much about, well, I don't know if you know, there's a researcher, Delit, who's a digital management author, and he identified 4 key themes in terms of what he called as digital disruption. So firstly, he identifies digitally underskilled workforce. Second area was about digital exclusion of the population. Thirdly, the lack of digital leadership. And fourthly, in terms of disruption impact on business itself and the population, because obviously technology moves so quickly and population, staff and humans actually lag behind. So there's a lot of factors involved. So what we saw as that is very much in terms of our work, we saw a lot of anecdotal evidence of that when working with communities. So such as barriers for exclusion in terms of, for example, language. We're not, obviously, not all ethnic communities have language issues, but generational issues will come through in terms of language barriers, in terms of low-level digital skills among the population, and also a lack of access to digital tools in terms of affordability, because obviously, from BME communities who are historically have higher rates of poverty, unemployment, etc., affordability is a big issue. So we've done a lot of work in terms of digital inclusion and capacity building of the sector, of communities, and I think that was very evident in the actual pandemic itself, when we had to rely a lot on home working, and a lot of businesses and communities we knew actually struggled. So when you look at that as anecdotal evidence through our work and for our programs, we just very much felt that actually there was something that's needed to be evidenced. And I think it was very timely that this piece of research came along, and we were very much looking forward to making sure there was actually evidence to substantiate the anecdotal evidence that we actually gathered. So that sets you the context as to why we got involved. In terms of our own role within the actual research itself, in terms of research, our role was initially to identify 30 ethnic minority participants from diverse communities throughout Scotland. No, it was actually Glasgow, in fact, sorry, initially, for face-to-face interviews. And 250, that's the next phase now, in terms of identifying 250 participants who engage in online surveys. Bit of irony there, obviously we're looking at barriers to digital exclusion, and yet I think quite a lot of focus is on digital engagement, so I think there will be challenges in that. But certainly I think some good approaches to that is very much the face-to-face initially, I think, which is very important. And the process involved in that was actually allowing for interpreters where the opportunities arose. There also is important in terms of the approach about using plain, simple English in terms of a lot of promotional things we do, and some of the testing that we're doing just now is about overcoming some of the language barriers in terms of translating some of the materials. And finally, it's important to know and understand that basically, how to actually reach out to communities itself in terms of promoting and marketing and engaging communities. So that's hopefully what we are bringing to the actual research and the value, and I think these are some key community engagement processes, and I think Charles will enlighten and broaden it out a bit more about community engagement, so I didn't want to touch too much on that. Yeah. The final area I want to touch on is very much looking at the challenges ahead as to why we've got involved. So can we move on now first next to Arnav, and then we'll speak a little bit later about the challenges ahead. Okay, I can. Mindful to keep everyone to time, so do forgive me. Okay, that's fine, Chair. My pleasure. Thank you very much, Colin. The support from Colin from SEMBO has been, it's been invaluable, as well as with all our community organizations in England, and we couldn't do the project without them. But now over to Dr. Arnav Q, who played a key role in the research so far, and also in analyzing the findings. So over to you, Arnav.
Great. So yeah, my name's Arnav Q, and so I just want to say that there's a real excitement around digital services and AI, their sort of potential to support policy, decision making and resource allocation, and their promise to deliver improved services for citizens. But however, as our lives are increasingly shifted online, in some cases without the choice of any alternative, we can't really escape that as powers the asymmetry of power that's often embedded in how such systems are designed, deployed, and developed, because none of this happens in a contextual, value-free vacuum. So there are several questions we need to ask, which include, is this the best way to deliver a service or the best solution to a problem? And in whose interest does this system primarily serve? And therefore, who may be at greater risk of harm? So I'll give you 3 examples from our research so far, which is still very much in the early stages of analysis, but we have heard from individuals that struggle with the language used in healthcare apps, despite being fluent speakers of English. So that suggests there's real issues with communication, service design, and that suggests that we need to create better feedback loops to make sure our systems are fit for purpose. We've also heard from others that have felt forced by energy companies to adopt smart energy services. So that's really taking away consumer choice and increasing privacy concerns. And the other day when I typed into Google for some reason, how to read, the top 3 responses were how to read a smart meter, how to read a gas meter, and then how to read a text file in Python. So now those 2 examples I'm sure would apply across the whole population, but I'll give you one very specific one to actually affects black men in particular in the UK. So rates of prostate cancer amongst black men over the age of 40 is 1 in 4. In the general population, it's 1 in 8. So that's a real health issue there. But we've heard from an individual in our research about the absolute barriers that they face in order to get referred for testing. So, so it's great having an AI tool that can be used to support clinical decision making for prostate cancer. But we've got a real issue there if there's a sizable majority of people who are struggling to gain access. They can't even get to the front door to even be referred, to even benefit from that AI tool. So, on a more general note, what we've heard from racialized communities as a whole, which is crucial to note, is that there are concerns why certain pieces of information are being collected, so ethnicity data, ID information, and they were conscious of its potential to be used in a punitive manner, and that it might be easier for veiled racism to operate if a computer says no instead of a person, so not having that direct contact and that chain of accountability. Although some people were quite supportive of the idea of data donation, so when it's really clear why you're collecting a certain piece of information and applying it to some sort of wider societal benefit, people are really happy to support that when the terms and conditions are made explicitly clear in a language that people can understand. And that's a real challenge facing all of us, I think, as a sector. So some racialized minorities in our research felt that, as a whole, services are generally being pushed online, delivered online, to obfuscate accountability. And I use the term obfuscate very purposely there because that was found, that term forms part of the definition of institutional racism that we heard in the McPherson report all the way back in 1999. And it's one of the key ways that obfuscation of responsibility and accountability, that's one of the key ways that racial and ethnic inequalities persist in our society. And so if the past is always present, what can we do as a whole to make it less so in the future? Overall, our citizens were quite right to be concerned about AI and the growth of digital services, because bias and exclusion can be entrenched throughout the whole life cycle of these systems. We know missing data is a huge problem. I mean, the ONS time and time again highlights that we have really patchy ethnicity data. But at the same time, ethnicity is a social construction, which is based on sort of historic patterns of migration to the UK. And especially if you're newly arrived, those categories actually don't make much sense. So it's not a fact, and it changes over time. So there is a bit of a tricky issue around that. We know indirect discrimination is a real problem. So often after machine learning models have been set up and running, then we realise that there are real issues there, which are even harder to address than those after the event issues. And I probably haven't even got time to really talk about proxies.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap up soon. Actually.
Okay, but the final point I do want to raise is that there are also a number of citizens that actually have little knowledge of how concerned to be about AI and digital services. And I think that's actually probably more alarming because that creates real issues around privacy, informed consent. And it means citizens will be less empowered to hold systems to account and give the feedback necessary to make services fit for purpose.
Thank you very much, Arnhem. So no mean task to sum up some of the key findings from 100 interviews. So you've done a brilliant job there. So we now have an opportunity to engage with you through the polling system. So there are questions online which you can answer, and we look forward to seeing the results of the polls of the, on the screen. So the first question is, what's your organization already doing to address racism? And it asks you whether you are capturing data on ethnicity for access to particular services. Well, the results are very promising. 100% apparently appear to be doing that. That's great, wonderful. So the next one, obviously a very enlightened lot in this audience, I have to say. Moving on to the next one, the next question is, can we have the results? Oh, sorry, I'll pause there and allow you to fill in. Sorry? Yes. Okay, a few minutes, yeah, okay. No, just if we can just wait the results and to see. Yeah, I mean, on the ethnicity point, it's really, of course, important to have ethnicity data so that we know whether or not there are inequalities in terms of access and outcomes of services. So without the ethnicity data, it would be a serious issue. We wouldn't be able to tell whether each different sections of the population are gathering data. So coming now to the next question, what's your organization already doing to address racism? Testing services is with 20% of your testing services, and 80% are not. So we can talk about that later, yeah? And then moving on to the next one. So the next question is, how many of you, what's the organization doing to involve minoritized ethnic communities in the design process? So far, we haven't got any responses to that. So, sorry? Are they really hard to? Yeah.
That's quite an open question.
Oh, okay, we'd like to maybe get a chance to hear the range of possibilities there in terms of what you're doing. Sounds really interesting. Okay, Colin, did you want to say something about testing, about the importance of, oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, sorry, Lynn, you're going to say something about design process. Yes, sorry.
Okay, so I'm Professor Lynn Bailey, Professor of Computer Science at Heriot-Watt University, and I'm here sort of to speak on behalf of the people who are doing the more AI side, I would suppose, but also the co-creation for the design. So one of the things Anna was just spoken about is the data that we're collecting through interviews with actual people. One of the things that our side is looking at is there's lots of data out there, there's lots of data already collected, census data and other data by many organizations. And one of the things we're doing is we're trawling everywhere to collect that data so that we can see what biases are already there and existing data already. So that's one of the interests for us, because actually systems are being built at the moment where they are actually triaging people in order to see their GP or in order for other health issues, which is a real concern because, for example, the symptoms that a woman would have when it comes to the chance of them having had a heart attack are in many ways completely different from a man. And most of the health data that's out there, especially the ones from medical trials, is based on male only. So the thing is, if we're making decisions on people's health data, which is happening now, then we need to know where the biases are within it. So what we're looking at is these data sets for the bias, but then also bringing together that with the interview data as well to see what we can understand about the biases that are already there, where there's missing data, where there isn't missing data. And what we're going to use that for is then to set up co-creation workshops, which we're hoping many organisations, of course starting with our partner organisations first, but then also with other organisations and other people who are interested in co-creating privacy-enhancing technologies with us so that we can look at both sides, the companies and industries which are creating these systems, and we'll work with them, but also the end users as well and work with them and bring them together in a co-creation workshops that Anim is organising, as are we, together collaboratively so that we can actually co-design the solutions based on what we've been finding in the earlier parts of the project. And that's our next phase, so if anybody's particularly interested, please leave your information, and we're hoping that we can work together with as many people as possible to make sure that we ensure that ethnic minorities are safe online and that also everyone is actually getting better technologies which don't keep having these biases within them.
Well, thank you, Lynn. Very well summed up. So can I now move on to our next community organization partners? So my pleasure to introduce Charles Kwaku Odoi, and all the way from Manchester. I'm very glad you could come up. So Charles is representing the Manchester-based Caribbean African Health Network. And so Charles, would you like to share with us your motivation for joining the project?
Yeah, thanks, Gina, and thanks everyone for your time. So my name is Charles Kwaku Odoi, Chief Executive, Caribbean African Health Network. We're based in Greater Manchester, but work across England. And we were set up in 2017 with a real vision of eradicating health inequalities and wider disparities for Caribbean African people. So we keep saying that COVID didn't teach us anything new, because prior to COVID or pre-COVID, we're knocking on doors of local authority, the health and social care organization, trying to shine a light on some of the inequalities that everyone or so many people woke up to during the pandemic. And so when, Gina and colleagues approached us and asked if we could get involved, for us, it was a real opportunity to bite off their hand, because the whole organization started on the back of, a PhD research that was looking at why Caribbean African people tend to have poorer cardiovascular outcomes. And it was focused on, the Greater Manchester area. And 2016, we had devolution in Greater Manchester. So 2017, when our chair was carrying out her PhD focus groups, the more focus groups she ran, the more people were asking what was going to happen to the data, because they get consulted, never know what's happened to the data. And within 6 months, July 2017, 10 people came together and the CIC was, formed. So therefore, research and innovation is a key focus of what we do, and up and down the country, lots of partnerships, lots of collaborations. So obviously the pandemic struck, many things had to be moved online. So we thought, this project was quite timely. More so some of the issues that, have been highlighted, whether around data and ethnicity monitoring, access to health and social care. Bearing in mind, sometimes assumptions are made, NHS is free, so it's free for everyone. But if you've lived in the country for 20, 30 years, you're used to paying for your own services, then just because you're in a new setting and things are free, doesn't mean that you're just going to access them. So for us, our role within this has been bringing people from our community to take part in the focus groups and the one-to-ones. We've also been supporting designing the survey, and which we hope upon sign off, then I think we do have a target of about 200 people or so from our community. And I'm sure what we've showed and evidence for Gina and colleagues is there is no hard to reach community. It's usually the models of engagement that do not work. My organization grew during the pandemic. In March 2020, I had 3 part-time staff doing 2-3 days a week. And then with, our desire to be responsive to COVID and, the vaccination rollout, we nearly, 50 plus. And whenever we've had to rally people to engage, it's the model of engagement and how we communicate things in a respectful manner. It means that there is uptake. And so, we've not had real struggle to recruit people. Because what we, sell to our colleagues and partners and those we collaborate with is, it's really important to take people on a journey. So not just asking and extracting information, but also involving them in how that findings are disseminated. And that sense of value and purpose that I gave an hour of my time. Yes, we agreed people will be reimbursed for their time, but then what difference is my contribution going to make? And where there are situations and the topics being, dealt with can trigger, re-traumatizing people. So whether it's on mental health, reviewing the mental health and other things, then making sure appropriate referral processes are there to support people. So that has been our, sort of contribution. I think a lot has been mentioned, whether around the prostate cancer. We know Black people twice more likely to have stroke, high rates of hypertension and other, comorbidities. And hence, it wasn't a surprise when, quite a high number of our people, were transitioning during the pandemic. So for us, it's about how we work with system partners to make sure they really understand how health inequalities play out. But then, the wider social determinants of health. So many of you know Professor Sir Michael Marmot, so levels of education, navigating the health system, housing, and many of you know, if you're poor, then you may not necessarily have a garden and where you live. Therefore, during the pandemic, people couldn't self-isolate, and all that. But also within the workforce are challenges, because if you are a migrant without recourse to public funds, you have a house and stuff you're looking after over here, but also in your home country, then that poses some real challenges. So you got to be making decisions on whether you have broadband at home versus feeding yourself and looking after people back, in your home country as well. And that poses some of the challenges. So in the current scheme of things, or pre-pandemic, if there were real inequalities, we know we don't. It was actually during the pandemic that was when ethnicity was first recorded on death certificates. When you talk of suicide prevention and bereavement, ethnicity data hasn't really featured. And we know there are real issues when it comes to recruitment and using AI tools and, a whole range of discrimination in there. But I suppose as we work with partners and embed lessons learned from the pandemic, it's about how we ensure that diversity is a key part, not as a tick box exercise, right across organizations and institutions, especially for our statutory sector, partners, where there's a real, responsibility to be accountable because we all pay taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks. And yes, as you know, you will be with us for the entire journey. So now we have some time to engage with questions from the audience. And yes, just, okay. Right. Okay. Great. Okay, so some, yeah, okay, thank you, thank you. So some really interesting questions here. Can some individuals identify with multiple different ethnicities or different ethnicities at different times or contexts? Does the typical categorical data collection oversimplify this? So really interesting and challenging question. The short answer is yes, but would panel members like to elaborate?
I think if I could chip in, this raises the issue of intersectionality and how people describe themselves. But then it's for service providers, commissioners, and others to think how we ensure there aren't multiple barriers. So if you are Black, a woman, disabled, LGBTQ, with all this, there are different barriers and that you face. So yes, people should be free. And I think, Anam, you referred to census data and the collection. And we say even among ethnic minority communities, we're not homogeneous. So if you just want to engage Africans, you can't make assumption everybody's English speaking. There are French speaking, Portuguese speaking, and others, with other native languages. So it's about making sure that we are aware of intersectionality and the multiple barriers those create.
Indeed. Anybody want to add to it? Then,
Yeah,
yeah?
I would agree that intersectionality is really important. That's the basis of the question. But I think a lot of organizations actually struggle with that data. I think Lynn mentioned that about there is a lot of data there, but it's about how you use it to inform strategy, to inform strategic direction. Digital strategy is the same. We asked 2 questions there, and it's about how often people actually engage at the design stage of of the actual process, because the data you capture is only as good as what people put in and are able to put in. So that's where the design is really important. And then once you gather data, it's very much about how you use it rather than gathering the data itself. We do a lot of work with, just final point, we do a lot of work with public bodies, and they actually struggle to get data from their existing workforce in terms of ethnicity and other protected characteristics. So maybe it's about looking at ways to try and improve ways to gather data and utilize it. So, sorry, Lynn.
No, I was going to say exactly. I mean, it's good that you made that point, because one of the things is missing data, and then the other issue when it comes to data is if we're having too many options, and there's lots of options, and the problem is then there's not enough data to make decisions on it. So one of the things is there's a balance that's got to be found, is what I'm saying, between making sure that you're covering enough people and that you're not excluding anybody, but at the same time ensuring that you're collecting enough data that you can make good, robust decisions on that data. So I think that's where we need to be. Us computer scientists need to be speaking to other people. We are fabulous at sitting in our labs and collecting data, and it's one of the reasons why some technologies don't work as well for some people than others. So voice technology will work extremely well for all the white males in this room, chances are. Because it's been trained on the people who were available to computer scientists, which were young males, they're students. So, the problem is if we train our systems on only us, then that's what they'll be biased systems, because humans make the systems biased. The system doesn't make itself biased most of the time. But basically it all starts from humans. It starts from humans, might end up somewhere else, but it starts from us. So, this is why it's so important that we are actually talking to the people that we are trying to talk to on this project, because we understand, or we're trying to understand, how we can make sure that our data isn't biased. So, sorry, that might have gone on a bit, sorry.
Thank you. So here's another really good question, and it's getting to the nub of the issue, really. It says, the question is, how can AI be used to not only protect minority ethnic communities online, but also empower them by amplifying their voices and promoting positive representation?
Involve us in the design. It's as simple as that. Take people on journeys. And the other thing I was going to say, I think sometimes there's a notion that we need huge, massive data sets, and that's important, especially when you're working on population sizes. But also, people do matter, if even it's a small minority. And it's about how you look at that small data set and then triangulate that to experiences. Because if you have 50 people within a geographical footprint, or now that we're moving towards, primary care networks, 30 to 50,000 neighborhood level, if there are 100 people who are not accessing your service but have comorbidities, that's a huge burden, on your purse. So how do you ensure that, yes, there are multiple levels of options, you're seeing that this is a small cohort, but what is that costing you in the grand scheme of things? So it's sometimes a way of fresh thinking. But then how do those poor experiences then get filtered across and then impacts? One of the things we're very keen on is that intergenerational experience. So we know the role and sometimes the cultural influence of adults in our communities and how that impacts on younger people. So how do we ensure that our younger generation grows up voting and not just listen to adults who, from their own experiences, from maybe where they've migrated from feel they don't have a voice. And that's really, really important. So we've got to look at the whole, system approach.
Indeed.
Sorry,
Yes?
I'm going to add with that, from the system side, I think it's really important exactly to involve the people that we have in the journey, but I think it's also really important to involve the systems developers, because if they don't understand what they're designing and why it's biased, then we're only done half the work. So we actually need to get both, because I think we need to make sure that end users are involved in the design of these privacy enhancing technologies. We also need to make sure that systems developers understand how to use these privacy enhancing technologies as well, so that we've got both sides trying to make sure that there's no bias in that data as much as possible.
Thank you.
I'm going to say, as the social scientist, that I think the triangulation of data is really important. So I think alongside with data set collection, etc., we need to be engaging in qualitative research, more participatory forms of research, creating those deliberative spaces and creating those feedback loops so we can actually keep the conversation going, because things will continue to arise that we don't know. It's an ongoing field, and I think the pace of academia, academic research and policy and tech is rapidly different, like markedly different. I'd say academia is maybe on the slower end, but maybe it might be policy, I'm not sure. So I think that's the real challenge, and I think, triangulation of data is really important, I would say.
And I'd also add that, in terms of research design, we thought about this very carefully, and capacity building through the research process was sort of built in, which is why we wanted to engage with organizations like SEMVO and, CAN to see how we could build their capacity to address these issues. And we are delighted, actually, we have 3 years, it's a 3-year project. So the first 18 months is a research empirically based, and the next 18 months is all about actioning it. What do we do with the findings, the co-design, the co-process, and how do we build capacity within the sector, multiple sectors, actually. So moving on next to another question. There are quite a few. Okay, so it says here, this is related. How do we encourage more ethnic minority communities to work in AI or get employment at key levels within AI organizations? So I'm going to exercise chair's prerogative and say it's not how you encourage them. It's also, what reframe it and say it's what organizations are doing. How do we encourage organizations to encourage more people to join them? So it's very much, the awareness among organizations that need to be raised about the importance of an ethnically diverse workshop, which I'm sure most people get, but also at different levels of the organization, not just at the more younger levels or the less experienced, but also at the highest levels of the organization. Sorry, that's that was. Anybody like to add to that?
I guess there's two things there. I think you're right. It's about encouraging probably younger generation as well in terms of the further higher education, but also the sector promoting what opportunities there are and why the sector is attractive to enter. But the other side of the issue is there might be quite a lot of people from BME communities wanting to enter the sector anyway, and it's about looking at your own data to see how many ethnic minority people have actually applied for jobs in the past, how many have been successful, shortlisted, and having that tracking within your own organizations in terms of ethnicity of workforce. So you look at your own organizational culture. So basically there's a lot of workforce development stuff that goes into that.
Thank you, Colin. And thank you very much for some very, very interesting questions. Do stick with us. There are opportunities to stay in touch. It's a digital booth. So please stay in touch, and we'll be around, if any of you want to chat to us as well. Thank you very much again for engaging with us. And may I thank my panel.
Professor Gina Netto and all our incredible panelists, thanks so much.